word. But that's all on this mid-show, of course. I'll hand it over to Alex to carry forward this one.
Absolutely. Harsh, just to recap, this is a significant negative for telecom companies that have AGR dues at this juncture. It is important to remind the viewers that Vodafone Idea is likely the worst hit. Bharti Airtel also, as Harsh pointed out just a short while back, has dues in the form of AGR. The one that does not is Reliance Industries through Jio. And so if you look at the stock performance, Reliance Industries is also losing ground, but perhaps that's a sentimental negative for the sector as a whole. The interpretation, of course, of the calculation of AGR dues being questioned, and that's something that was taken up by the Supreme Court. The CGI, the Chief Justice of India, saying in July of this year that they will consider listing a plea by Vodafone Idea to correct the alleged errors in the computation of adjusted gross revenue. This is, of course, Harsh, something that goes back all the way to 2020, and it has been discussed several times. The judgment in 2020, at that time, people said it was very clear. It came back and it was reviewed again, and it's now seemingly the final nail in the coffin.
Absolutely. It seems like, Alex, and there doesn't seem to be any recourse to it as well, as Varun very correctly pointed out. And the sense is that there wasn't too much expectation around an AGR due waiver either, except a possible consideration that companies in the sector have anyway been through a rough patch. And maybe just from that perspective, a consideration on AGR dues. But the Supreme Court likely has gone with the more practical, or rather the more theoretical interpretation. And they've stuck by their judgment.
You know, I'm just assuming that there are a few people that have seen this and are just tuning in right now, Harsh. So why don't we recap them on what Varun also told us about the judgment? What stood out to you?
Well, the fact that there is no change with regard to the September 2020 judgment against telcos with regard to payments to be made for the 10-year period ending March 31 along with the 8% interest. That judgment stands as is, so that the dues which are required to be paid, and I'll just state those amounts: 70,000 crore for Vodafone Idea and 44,000 crore for Bharti Airtel.
Yeah,
that's the kind of quantum in terms of, that's the quantum of impact.
Let's talk about these stocks in more details. We've got Rucha joining in to give you some perspective on how badly this would affect the companies. Of course, Rucha, what we've spoken about so far is that this is something based on an earlier judgment. It's a reiteration of that, and so no relief provided for these telecom companies. What is the implication for the financials of these companies?
You're right, Alex. So going back to the AGR dues timeline now, so let me first talk to you about what are AGR dues. So these telecom companies have licenses and they have to pay a certain percentage of the revenue to the government. Now, the case was all about how to calculate this kind of AGR due. Now, the telecom companies talked about only telecom revenue to be included for calculating that percentage, but government said that both telecom as well as non-telecom revenue should be included to calculate the percentage of AGR dues, and hence the amount of dues went up. Now, talking about the timeline, well, in 2005 and 2006, government and the telecom industry, talked about how this could be calculated. But then in 2019, the verdict came against telecom players, and this has been the stance by the government and the authorities as well, that AGR dues will be calculated on both telecom as well as non-telecom revenue. And therefore, Bharti Airtel had already paid around 18,000 crore rupees, and Vodafone Idea had paid around 7,800 crore rupees back in 2019. But again in 2020, these telecom companies had filed a plea against this kind of judgment passed by the authorities. This also happened in 2021 as well as in 23, where Vodafone Idea made an appeal, and other telecom companies as well, against this kind of judgment. And again today, the Supreme Court has come out with the verdict that this AGR dues will be against the telecom companies, and hence this will amount to Bharti Airtel paying about 44,000 crore rupees as well as 8% interest, and Vodafone Idea paying around 70,300 crore in AGR dues. Well, Reliance Jio does not have much of AGR dues because it has already paid its dues and it started operating in 2016. So not much of a comparison with Reliance Jio over there, but a big hit on Vodafone Idea and Bharti Airtel is what we could see even right now.
Thanks so much for breaking that down for us. Richa, do stay with us. We might come back to you on certain aspects. We do have Shahina Mughatan joining us right now, and Shahina has a view on the telecom space. Shahina, I'm sure that you've been looking at these companies for quite a while, the financials of these companies. In a sense, nothing changes, but that is what is negative for the companies with the massive dues. Does this change your view on the sector and on individual companies at all?
No, it doesn't change the view on the overall sector, which is positive for the long term, because the backbone of all communications in the long term is telecom, and it's just like more like a three companies that are there that will capture the overall business going forward, at least as of now. So you have, of course, Reliance with the Jio, which I think is the best placed. And even the latest news sentiment is not going to be negative for Reliance Jio. I think they have got other sectors also like which are doing well. For example, they have their retail business, which is doing well. OMC business, oil business is doing well. So to that extent, Reliance does, of course, remain the topic in the overall space for the longer term. Having said that, Bharti, I believe if you see the last 1 year, the stock has given a very good performance. It's up by almost about 60% over the year. So you could be looking to add, this is slightly negative in terms of sentiment. Of course, the balance sheet is very strong for Bharti. Also, they have got a very strong cash flow on a quarter by quarter basis. So any such negative news or such payments, they can take it in their stride in the medium term. Having said that, I would still prefer Bharti to be purchased at slightly lower levels because valuations now are become a bit expensive. So any negative news, as we've just heard, affects the stock price. So I would be happier to buy it closer to maybe 1,300, 1,400. Any major dip that comes, it's looking like a good ad. Vodafone, I used to say, or I had a call that you hold it with a stop loss. The stop loss has been triggered. So I think now investors should get out of Vodafone. The balance sheet looks very stretched, very difficult for them to come out of all these issues. And I don't think, they're getting too much support from the government who also holds stake. So I think Vodafone has become extremely risky and investors should exit.
Okay, that's a fair point. I'm curious also, Harsh, about Indus Tower, because the conversation primarily has to do with regard to Vodafone and how it's doing, right? Because the dues that Vodafone has towards Indus Tower, it's dependent on whether or not they can sort out the issues that they're facing in terms of the dues that they have for AGR, which, as Harsh has pointed out, we've pointed out, 70,000 crore rupees, not a very small amount, and certainly something that's going to prove a bit of a challenge down the line.
So just for perspective, Vodafone's market cap currently is 80,000 crore. They have a debt of over 2 lakh crore. Yeah. And of course, while a lot of this may have been expected, but 70,000 crore certainly not a small amount in the larger context of things.
I believe we're joined by Satya Gupta, who is ex-principal advisor of TRI. And Satya, if you can give us some perspective on this. The argument from the telecom companies is not new. What we've come to hear from the Supreme Court is that the earlier judgment stands. In a sense, nothing changes. What is your reading of this?
Oh, yeah, thank you. And actually, as you know, the law of the land is supreme, and it is when it is interpreted by the highest court, Supreme Court, then that is what stands. But yes, in any business, and there is a principle, error and omission are regretted. So I think now on a national cause or on a social and governance and good principle or the justice in the word and spirit, if it has to prevail, then they have to invoke, and the Supreme Court have to invoke and take cognizance of error and omission, permitted or regretted, what they call it actually. So, and they can get a audit done by a independent body, which is not the normal statutory auditor or neither the CAG, maybe someone more unbiased or more, let us say, unconnected in many sense.
Understood, Satya. Thanks so much. Satya, thanks so much for that.
Do that audit and then let the truth prevail, actually.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Satya, thanks so much for making that point. Independent committee should audit how things are functioning with these telecom companies. That's a word coming in from Satya. Let's talk about the stock impact, in fact, and let's pull up the charts and see what is happening right now, because some of the moves that you've seen early on, knee-jerk reactions have unwound. This is not the case for Indus Towers. Gaurav Dua of Sharekhan is joining in. Gaurav, we've been talking about the latest update from the Supreme Court. In essence, nothing changes from the earlier judgment, which a lot of people are saying is a negative for the likes of Vodafone Idea, Bharti Airtel, even Indus Tower. How are you reading this development?
So, our view was something different here. What we always thought and believed is that whatever be the verdict of the Supreme Court on the AGR issue, Bharti Airtel as a stock will do well. And that is what we have seen. Why is that? If the AGR verdict is in favor of the telecom companies, Bharti Airtel, just like other players, will stand to gain in terms of the outgoes that they'll have. On the other hand, if they lose the case, then it would mean the end of the road for Vodafone Idea, which means that the market will move from a 3-player market to a 2-player market now. Now that is a good news structurally for Bharti Airtel, and this would mean that the tariff hike that we have seen this a month or so back in the industry will further pick up pace because of the easing out of the competitive industry. Intensity in the industry.
I think we'll get in Ajay Puri in moments from now as well. But Gaurav, the question is this. So we know that this is maybe okay news for Bharti Airtel, but it's a big letdown for the expectations that Vodafone had. How much does it dent Vodafone's ability to make a better business case? Because they have made a business case, they've got some capital, but how much does this dent, or you think it doesn't, and this is a knee-jerk reaction?
Don't have active call on this Vodafone
no, which is
idea,
fine.
so I'll not be able to get into
but
specifics.
Gaurav, I don't want you to comment on whether the stock is a buy, sell, hold. I'm just trying to understand about the business case. How much does this? Because they've gotten equity capital, they've gotten a further fundraise. They were hoping for this to happen. That it hasn't happened, does it impede their ability to make a better business case?
Of course, this will have a problem for this Vodafone Idea, because the whole survival now is again back in question, and that is clearly being reflected in the stock price today.
Is under question, Gaurav? Did I hear you say that?
Yes, because it will become more and more tough for them to actually raise money from here and grow, because it's not only about surviving, it is also about growth, and you need to invest for that. And Vodafone Idea, compared to its peers, have been lagging behind in terms of their investment into network, and this will make it all the more tough for them.
Point. All right, that's something to raise. Thanks so much for joining in, for getting us this perspective. Ajay Puri, former COO of Airtel India and Southeast Asia, joining in. Ajay, your initial thoughts, status quo maintained, and that is a negative. I'm not sure if you can comment on all players, but we're curious about what you think that this will do for the operations of the telecom companies that have significant dues.
Having me on the program. I think it's for me, I think it's industry was expecting a relief from here, because there were some apparent errors that were there, and industry was only wanting to get those reviewed, apart from penalties and interest being reviewed. It's a bit of an unfortunate situation, but we need to respect the verdict of the Supreme Court. I think one thing is very clear that, government must make every single attempt to keep the industry as a three-player industry rather than bring it down to two-player industry. As your previous discussion was happening, we don't want to see India going to a duopoly. Three-player is a good construct plus government operator as its fourth player, and we should not under any circumstance let Voda Idea bundle up under the pressure of this verdict. And government has done some very good pioneering work in the last few years in terms of telecom reform. Part 1. I would urge government, and I think they have within their withal, to do the part 2 of the telecom reforms and provide the relief to the industry. It's a mammoth sum. It's a mammoth financial number. So, and industry health is obviously at a risk despite all that has happened. And the third player is really struggling at this stage. So I would expect that government will come forward. They have all the executive powers, available to them. And they can do, whatever needs to be done to keep the three-player industry healthy and active. I mean, finally, India needs the digital growth. India needs digital highways. And India needs an industry that provides all that in a very healthy space. So I would urge government to intervene now, to make sure that India remains a three-player healthy three-player telecom market.
Yeah, no, point well noted. Mr. Puri, we're also getting in Balaji Subramaniam, of course, Vice President of Research at IIFL with us as well. And would be lovely to get both of your views together. So, Balaji, we're just speaking to, Mr. Ajay Puri, former CEO of Airtel, and he's saying that now there is a bit of a ball in the government's court to try and come forward and help the struggling and pass a reform which will also help the industry at large, but help the third player which is struggling. My question to you is, Vodafone is on a lower circuit today. There were expectations from Vodafone that this will be passed. It has not passed. Some people say this could very well threaten the survival of Vodafone. Do you go as far, or do you just believe that it makes their revival process a bit weaker?
So the revival process definitely gets, it does receive a fairly significant setback because the kind of relief that would have come through, assuming 50% relief on the total dues of 70,000 crores, would have been to the tune of 35,000 crores, and that is a pretty sizable sum. And, that means that on a fair value basis, it's about rupees 5 per share. Which is quite significant, and more importantly, once the moratorium on these AGR payments is lifted later next year, it would have brought down the annual payment or the annual cash outgo by about 8,000 odd crores. So that is a pretty significant relief which Vodafone Idea will now not get. So that gets pretty tricky on that count. Now the thing is, even though Vodafone Idea managed to raise equity, they are still in the process of raising bank loans and debt. So now, what happens to that process, that is most likely going to get prolonged, because you will have this also weighing in, considering the weekend cash flow position after today's verdict. The lenders might go a little cold on the trail. So that is the critical thing. So if they are able to manage to tie in debt funding, then the story will more or less continue. But if that process also starts facing delays, then in the interim they will continue to lose market share as they have been losing all these years.
Mr. Subramanian, Harsh also joining in quickly with regard to the cascading impact on Indus Towers. Your view on that one?
Balaji, the question is for you.
Okay. So, as far as the cascading impact on Indus Towers is concerned, see, if there is a delay in fundraising by Vodafone Idea, then, of course, the network rollout of
Guy, the
Vodafone
CEO,
Idea will also be slower. that will be, clearly negative for Indus Towers. So, to that extent, there can be both, time delay impact and fewer network sites which Vodafone would have otherwise rolled out.
So, if you can just quantify the quantum currently which Vodafone owes Indus, and what's your sense? Is that going to go up, going into maybe the next quarter or the next year?
While they haven't kind of quantified it explicitly, my estimate is that around 4,500 to 5,000 crores is what Vodafone owes Indus. These are the past dues. And Vodafone has been paying Indus on time for the last 12 to 18 months. So in the near term, those payments should keep coming in. The bigger challenge will be what happens 1 year down the line, because that is when the moratorium will get lifted and Vodafone will have to start making large cash flows to the government. So to that extent, I don't see, at least in the near term, the overdues building up. But after a year, if Vodafone is still unable to raise funds, then there is a risk that the overdues again start building up. But, frankly, this is all too premature.
No doubt about that, Balaji. I do want to get your view on the next question that I'm going to ask Ajay as well. So maybe based on his response. Ajay, I'm curious. You mentioned that the government should step in for the health of the sector. But there's also the fact that it is invested. It is an owner of stake in the company, in Vodafone Idea. And so therefore, it would benefit, of course, from the continued survival and performance of this company. What, in your opinion, are the steps that can be considered? You said that measures should be taken, a review should be done. But let's talk about steps that can be taken. What, in your opinion, should be done?
I think one government can create industry-friendly part 2 of the reform. They can look at the entire tax structures if that is needed to be reviewed, because industry has been seeking, review of the tax structure. They could also look at the whole penalty and interest part of the order, and also if industry has listed out that these are anomalies in the tax calculation, AGR calculations, if government can have a look at it and see how within the legal boundaries they can acknowledge it. I mean, there is no harm government to have do a review themselves, look at it, or waive off the penalty interest, or find a way to, give industry a relief, because this is something that is, as we all know, over-exaggerated sum. With due respect to everybody, and that needs to be corrected for. So industry was expecting Supreme Court to intervene, but that hasn't happened, unfortunately. Let government intervene and come forward and say, okay, we're willing to review it and we do X, Y, Z.
Balaji, is that something that would be the final potential savior for a company like Vodafone Idea if the government were to review the penalties, as Ajay has just suggested? Is that the only option available?
See, frankly, I don't know. As in, what can, constitute a potential contempt of court? Because last time when there were discussions by the government on the aspect of doing a recalculation, the Supreme Court was dead against it, and it came down hard on the DOT. So, frankly, I don't know, as in, how much leeway the government has got, and, frankly, I am not a legal expert, so, I don't want to comment on that.
Balaji, I just have one question, and the same question then for Ajay Puri as well, but the government, when they convert the further dues into equity, I mean, it just becomes a very large equity. It's the great intention to have a 3-player market. It's the right thing to do. Do we now run the risk of this third player being considerably weakened? And again, I just bring this back. In all the communication that Vodafone has put out every time, they were hoping for the AGR outcome to be in their favor. it was not the base case for business, right? I presume. And if that is not the case, why, I mean, is fundamentally the logic of Vodafone being a strong third player flawed, or is it not?
Even if this, assuming this relief came through, still Vodafone would have had a pretty stiff ask because a significant portion of their liability is related to the spectrum that they have, and I don't think that liability is going to go away. So to that extent, even in the event of a favorable verdict, I would have expected some bit of government due conversion into equity to happen at some point in time. So now the thing is, the potential dilution risk is even higher. So I would believe that if the banks are willing to lend 25,000 crores, which the company has been targeting, I think if that comes through, still there is some room for hope. As in, it's still an uphill task because right now Vodafone's market share is around the 16-17% mark, and I don't think that is going to substantially go up even in the event of a favorable verdict. But now, the battle would shift to ensure that this doesn't, further keep sliding down.
Balaji, we'll take 2 moments of your time, but because I would have one more question for you, I'm sure Harsh and Alex would too. But Ajay Puri, the belief might have been that the low-lying hanging fruit of 2G customers, which Vodafone had a plenty or has a plenty, moving to 4G as their 4G arsenal becomes more powerful, would be a telling case for Vodafone's revenues to naturally move up. I mean, does that still stay to your mind, or that doesn't?
Yeah, I think my understanding is that Voda is on a course of trying to recover from where it was and compete. And I think that course will continue. It might get a little bit of, obstacles unless the funding comes in terms of the loans and borrowing. But if it does come through, they will certainly put up a brave fight with 4G investments and, filling up their gap. But I think the important thing is it is a government to decide.
Yeah.
Do they want India to be a 2-player market or a 3-player healthy market?
Agree.
Do they want... Second question is, do they want a healthy telecom industry, or they want a fragile...
To be fair, Ajay Puri, I mean, the government has shown its hand in some fashion, right? They have helped Vodafone in some fashion.
They have.
But in this case, it's beyond the government's case. But, therefore the question, and my last question, at least, I don't know if Harsh and Alex have more, but my last question, both to Balaji and Ajay Puri, is this. Post-moratorium, brokerages estimated an annual payment of 48,000 crores. It's one of them. I don't know, Balaji, what your number was, but now that most of the things that we know, unless what the government decides to do is not known, but everything else is now known, do you expect the subscriber gains for a Bharti and a Jio to be accelerated in the months to come? And therefore, what is Vodafone's pain and maybe Indus Tower's pain? Would it be Bharti and Jio's gain?
Can I come in?
Yeah, Balaji, the question is to you.
Okay. I mean, this was Ajay.
Oh, Ajay, sorry. Okay, Ajay Puri, maybe you make this point. Sorry, but the voice confused. Maybe you make this point and then I'll go to Balaji on this. Please come in first.
No, I personally believe, we should not, both Bharti Airtel or Jio should not see it with a narrow-minded approach here. Some gains for the short term do not do good for the industry in the long term, right? So I think, and this has been stated very upfront and clearly by many, leaders of Airtel, including the chairman, that India must have a 3-player market. We should not look at...
Ajay Puri, sorry, the only reason I'm stepping in here is that from a telecom industry perspective, completely buying that. But there is an event that has happened, and as an anchor, I also have to try and make my viewer know, who's an equity investor, about whether from an equity investor's perspective, currently, is Vodafone's pain Bharti Airtel's and Jio gain? So that was the nature of my question. I completely buy your point that it should be a 3-player industry for the country and for the consumers like me and you as well. It's better to have 3 strong players. So I'm buying that completely. The only reason I asked this question, and to Balaji specifically, was because I owe this duty to my viewer that can this Vodafone Spain be gains for Bharti Airtel and Jio? So that's where I was coming from. Balaji, can I request you to maybe address that question from a market's perspective? Is this going to be a gain for Bharti Airtel and Jio?
So a weaker Vodafone, so assuming that Vodafone has challenges in raising the debt funding, and subsequently that has an effect on their timelines in terms of deployment of capex. That means that the window for market share gain for both Bharti and Jio gets wider to that extent. So that would be clearly positive for Jio. For Bharti also, that will be, it will be a positive, even though, they would have also benefited to the tune of around 18,000 crores if they had got this relief. So, to that extent, it's somewhat mixed for Bharti. And whether it is outright positive for Bharti, it will depend on, what happens to Bharti's rollout program.
Balaji, I'm just curious, I'm jumping in with one quick question. Does this change your calls at all on companies in the telecom space?
See, I have been positive on Bharti and Vodafone. I had an ad recommendation, but of course, now this needs to be now analyzed in light of the fact that one is the direct hit of rupees 5 per share because of this relief not coming through, and the other would be what happens to the overall capex program. So clearly it is a substantial negative for Vodafone Idea. As far as Indus is concerned, of course, that will also, they will also bear the brunt of this. So I would stick to both Bharti Airtel and Bharti Hexacom as my top picks in the space.
Okay, fair point. Thanks so much, Balaji, for joining in and giving us the perspective that you did. In case you're joining in right now, we've had an entire conversation about the latest update from the Supreme Court. The AGR case, of course, that goes back several years, the status quo has been maintained, and that is being viewed as a negative. The plea that was made for the recalculation of AGR dues by Vodafone Idea primarily has been shot down by the Supreme Court. Rucha is joining in to give you a perspective on what this is all about in case you've missed it today and over the course of the last several months and years. Rucha, what can you tell us?
Thanks, Alex. So I'll start with what are AGR dues first. Now, these are the dues which telecom companies have to pay to the government in the form of percentage of revenue, and this is for using the spectrum license. Now, the case was all about that government had calculated this kind of dues as a percentage of total revenue, that is telecom as well as non-telecom revenue. But then the telecom companies later believed that only telecom revenue should be included in calculating this kind of percentage. And therefore, these telecom companies had filed a plea against this kind of calculation. But the latest development over here is that Supreme Court has rejected this kind of plea by the telecom government, by the telecom companies, and this means that the percentage of revenue to be used for calculation of this fees would include both telecom as well as non-telecom revenues, and hence would increase the liability of the telecom companies. Now, if we move on to the next slide, we'll see that the kind of AGR dues which each company is required to pay to the government, starting with Vodafone Idea, it owes around 70,300 crore in dues to the government, which is the highest amongst all the three players. Next one is Bharti Airtel, owes around 44,000 crore in dues to the government, and lastly Reliance Jio. There are no such particular dues to be paid to the government because it only started in 2016 and it has already paid the dues which it had to. So no further dues are likely for Reliance Jio, but we'll see what kind of cash lies on the balance sheet for Vodafone Idea and Bharti Airtel. Well, Vodafone has 535 crore of cash against a 70,300 crore liability. I mean, a huge sort of asset liability mismatch over here. Bharti Airtel has around 16,340 crore cash on balance sheet against its AGR liability of about 44,000 crore. So clearly, Bharti as of now stands at a better position than what Vodafone Idea does. But then let me move quickly again against the timeline. Now, back in 2005 and 2006, government had this kind of issue about the calculation of these AGR dues, wherein it mentioned about using both telecom and non-telecom revenues for this kind of due. But naturally, telecom companies did not agree, and hence they filed another petition, if we can move on, in 2019. But then again, the verdict went against the telecom companies, and Bharti Airtel paid around 18,000 crore of dues, and Vodafone Idea also paid certain dues amounting to around 7,800 crore. Back in October 23, again, Vodafone and Bharti Airtel together had filed in October 2023. If we can move on to the next slide, and coming to the last timeline, we can see that these companies had filed a petition against the initial judgment by the government. But then today, Supreme Court denied that kind of plea, and I think this is the last stage. And now these telecom companies will have to pay this kind of dues back to the government.
All right, thank you for breaking that down in great detail. Let's quickly pull up, the couple of stocks which have seen an impact. Vodafone, of course, now 15% lower. We've seen a second circuit on Vodafone, so that continues in free fall, at least as we speak. Let's also pull up Airtel, where we're not seeing much of an impact, but Indus Towers 2 down, now 12.5%. So maybe second circuit not hit, but nonetheless quite a large chunk of investor wealth wiped out from this 1 lakh crore plus kind of market cap company. Ajay, let me come back to you if I can, Mr. Puri. With regard to resolution of this, what are the options available now with the industry as a whole? And second, how likely in your view is the government to listen to some of these, possible options for resolution, if any, because there doesn't seem to be much from a legal standpoint that these companies can do.
Yeah, I agree. But I think obviously one step the industry has is to go back to the government and on the drawing board and request for whatever possible relief, either on the AGR case or otherwise, that can be provided to the industry to help the industry financial health improve. Or the second option, which is always being talked about, is another round of pricing increase possibility, maybe quicker than what it was anticipated earlier, or in the event that the AGR relief would have come. Because in any case, India continues to be the lowest tariff country, providing 30-40 GB of consumption at average ARPU of less than 200 rupees. And I think India can easily take up to 300 rupees ARPU sooner than later. So maybe that's another possible relief, because that will provide a big relief to even the Vodafone Idea, because their cash flows will improve, their ability to, show a better P&L and better balance
Fair
sheet
point.
will improve. So I think both the options should be explored.
Yeah, Ajay,
Certainly.
certainly a fair point. And perhaps on that front, the first steps have already been taken with price hikes announced by the industry not too long back. Thanks so much for joining in and for giving us a perspective that you had on this latest development. Well, we've given you all of the bases with regard to the latest development in the telecom space. Big negative for Vodafone Idea, to a certain extent also a negative for Bharti Airtel. It has taken it on the chin though and is off the low point of the day, trading with gains of about 0.4%. Indus Tower is not doing too well either. That's the other big hit, and that's largely on account of the dues that Vodafone Idea has towards Indus Tower. We've got more lined up over the course of the day. Do stay tuned. We've got live coverage of markets after this very quick break.